Chapter 6 of the 10 kingdoms represented by the 10 horns of the fourth beast. Now by the wars above described, the western empire of the Romans, about the time that Rome was besieged and taken by the Goths, became broken into the following 10 kingdoms. 1. The kingdom of the Vandals and Alans in Spain and Africa. 2. The kingdom of the Suevians in Spain. 3. The kingdom of the Visigoths. 4. The kingdom of the Alans in Gallia. 5. The kingdom of the Burgundians. 6. The kingdom of the Franks. 7. The kingdom of the Britons. 8. The kingdom of the Huns. 9. The kingdom of the Lombards. 10. The kingdom of Ravenna. 7 of these kingdoms are thus mentioned by Sigonius in the reign of Honorius. The Huns were granted a fixed place of abode and admitted unto Pannonia. The Vandals, the Alans, the Suevi, and the Goths into Spain, and the Alans, Burgundians, and Goths into Gaul. Add the Franks, Britons, and Lombards, and you have the 10. For these arose about the same time with the 7. But let us view them severally. 1. The kings of the Vandals were AC 407 Godegislelas, 407 Gonderic, 426 Gaiseric, 477 Huneric, 484 Gundmund, 496 Thrasimund, 523 Giseric, 530 Gelimer. Godegisilus led them into Gallia, AC 406, Gunderic into Spain, AC 409, Giseric into Africa, AC 427, and Gelimer was conquered by Belisarius, AC 533. Their kingdom lasted in Gallia, Spain, and Africa together 126 years, and in Africa they were very potent. The Alans had only 2 kings of their own in Spain, Resplendial and Atasis, Eutychus or Othakar. Under Resplendial, they went into France AC 407 and into Spain AC 409. Atasis was slain with almost all his army by Valia, king of the Visigoths, AC 419. And then the remainder of these Alans subjected themselves to Gunderic, king of the Vandals in Boetica, and went afterwards with them into Africa, as I learned out of Procopius, whence the kings of the Vandals styled themselves kings of the Vandals and Alans, as may be seen in the edict of Huneric recited by Victor in his Vandalic persecution. In conjunction with the Chatti, these Alans gave the name of Cathalaunia or Cathalania to the province which is still so called. These Alans had also Gepetes among them, and therefore the Gepetes came into Pannonia before the Alans left it. There they became subject to the Huns till the death of Attila, AC 454. And at length were conquered by the Ostrogoths. 2. The kings of the Suevians were AC 407 Ermeric, 438 Richilla, 448 Rhychirius, 458 Maldra, 460 Frumarius, 463 Regismund, and after some other kings who are unknown reigned AC 558 Theodomir, 568 Miro, 582 Euboricus, and 583 Andeca. This kingdom after it had been once seated in Spain, remained always in Galicia and Lusitania. Ermeric, after the fall of the Alan kingdom, enlarged it into all Galicia, forcing the Vandals to retire into Boetica and the Carthaginian province. This kingdom lasted 177 years, according to Isidorus, and then was subdued by Leovigilidus, king of the Visigoths, and made a province of his kingdom, AC 585. 3. The kings of the Visigoths were AC 400, Alaric, 410, Athalphus, 415, Sergeric and Valia, 419, Theodoric, 451, Thorismund, 452, Theoderic, 465, Uric, 482, Alaric, 505, Genseric, 526, Amalaric, 531, Theudius, 548, Theudisclus, etc. I date this kingdom from the time that Alaric left Thrace and Greece to invade the Western Empire. In the end of the reign of Athalphus, the Goths were humbled by the Romans and attempted to pass out of France into Spain. Sergeric reigned but a few days. In the beginning of Valia's reign, they assaulted the Romans afresh, but were again repulsed and then made peace on this condition, that they should, on the behalf of the empire, invade the barbarian kingdoms in Spain. And this they did, together with the Romans in the years 417 and 418, overthrowing the Alans and part of the Vandals. Then they received Aquitaine of the emperor by a full donation, leaving their conquests in Spain to the emperor, and thereby the seats of the conquered Alans came into the hands of the Romans. In the year 455, Theoderic, assisted by the Burgundians, invaded Spain, which was then almost all subject to the Suevians, and took a part of it from them. AC 506, the Goths were driven out of Gallia by the Franks. AC 585, they conquered the Suevian kingdom and became lords of all Spain. AC 713, the Saracens invaded them, but in time they recovered their dominions and have reigned in Spain ever since. 4. The kings of the Alans in Gallia were Goar, Sambida, Iacheric, Sengibanus, Burgas, etc. Under Goar, they invaded Gallia, AC 407, and had seats given them near the Rhine, AC 412. Under Sambida, whom Bushir makes the successor, if not the son of Goar, they had the territories of Valence, given them by Idius, the emperor's general, AC 450. Under Eocheric, they conquered a region of the rebelling Galli Arborici, given them also by Idius. This region was from them named Aliconium, quasi Alanorum Conventus. Under Sangibanus, they were invaded, and their regal city, Orleans, was besieged by Attila, king of the Huns, with a vast army of 500,000 men. Idius and the barbarian kings of Gallia came to raise the siege and beat the Huns in a very memorable battle, AC 451, in Campus Catalanicis, so called from these Alans mixed with the Chatti. The region is now called Campania or Champagne. In that battle were slain on both sides 162,000 men. A year or two after, Attila returned with an immense army to conquer this kingdom, but was again beaten by them and the Visigoths together in a battle of 3 days' continuance, with a slaughter almost as great as the former. Under Burgas or Baragor, they infested Gallia round about till the reign of Maximus the emperor, and then they passed the Alps in winter and came into Liguria, but were there beaten, and Burgas slain by Ritkemer, commander of the emperor's forces, AC 464. Afterwards, they were again beaten by the joint force of Odoacer, king of Italy, and Childeric, king of the Franks, about the year 480, and again by Theodobert, king of the Austrian Franks, about the year 511. 5. The kings of the Burgundians were AC 407, Gundikar 436, Gundiak 467, Bilimir 473, Gundobaldus, with his brothers 510, Sigismund 517, Godomaris. Under Gundikar, they invaded Gallia AC 407 and had seats given them by the emperor near the Rhine in Gallia Belgica AC 412. They had Saxons among them and were now so potent that Orosius AC 417 wrote of them, "The exceptional strength of the Burgundians is today witnessed by the provinces of Gaul, possession of which they seized and in which they are now established." About the year 435, they received great overthrows by Idius and soon after by the Huns. But 5 years after had Savoy granted them to be shared with the inhabitants, and from that time became again a potent kingdom, being bounded by the river Rhodanus, but afterwards extending much further into the heart of Gallia. Gundobald conquered the regions about the rivers Araris and Rhodanus with the territories of Marseilles, and invading Italy in the time of the Emperor Glycerius, conquered all his brethren. Godomaris made Orleans his royal seat, whence the kingdom was called Regnum Aurelianorum. He was conquered by Clotharius and Childebert, kings of the Franks, AC 526. From thenceforward, this kingdom was sometimes united to the kingdom of the Franks, and sometimes divided from it, till the reign of Charles the Great, who made his son Carolotus king of Burgundy. From that time, for about 300 years together, it enjoyed its proper kings, and was then broken into the dukedom of Burgundy, county of Burgundy, and county of Savoy, and afterwards those were broken into other lesser counties. 6. The kings of the Franks were AC 407, Theodomir 417, Pharamond 428, Clodio 448, Meravius 456, Kildaric 482, Clodovius, etc. Venderline and Boucher, two of the most diligent searchers into the originals of this kingdom, make it begin the same year with the barbarian invasions of Gallia, that is AC 407. Of the first kings, there is in Lab's Bibliotheca manuscript this record: certain historical extracts from the ancient genealogical stem of the kings of France. Genobaldus, Marcomerus, Suno, Theodomerus, these were petty kings at different periods in the early history of the nation of the Franks, but historical writers leave it doubtful in what order or by what title they succeeded one to the other. Pharamundus, under him, their first king, the Franks submitted to those laws previously enacted by their chieftains, Visogastus, Atrogustus, Saligestus. Coquilo, this king, crossed the Rhine and decisively defeated the Romans in the Carbonarian forest. He captured and held Camericum. He reigned for 20 years. In his reign, the Franks advanced as far as the Somme. Merovecus, in this reign, the Franks destroyed Treves, burned Metz, and penetrated to Orleans. Now for Genobaldus, Marcomer, and Suno, they were captains of the Transrhenane Franks in the reign of Theodosius, and concern us not. We are to begin with Theodomir, the first king of the rebelling Sali, called Didio by Ivo Carnotensis, and Thedio and Theudemeres by Renanus. His face is extant in a coin of gold found with this inscription: Theudemir Rex, published by Petavius, and still or lately extant, as Vendeline testifies, which shews that he was a king, and that in Gallia, seeing that rude Germany understood not then the coining of money, nor used either Latin words or letters. He was the son of Ricimer or Ricomer, the favorite of the Emperor Theodosius, and so being a Roman Frank, and of the Salian royal blood, they therefore upon the rebellion made him king. The whole time of his reign you have stated in Excerpta Gregori Terranensis e Fredigario, caption 5678, where the making him king, the tyranny of Jovinus, the slaughter of the associates of Jovinus, the second taking of Triers by the Franks, and their war with Cassinus, in which this king was slain, are as a series of successive things thus set down in order. After the extinction of the dukes among the Franks, kings were again elected from the same stock as in former times. At that same time, Jovinus assumed for himself the position and honor of monarch. Constantine directed his flight towards Italy, but was beheaded at the river Mintius by assassins in the service of Jovinus. Many of the nobility were on the orders of Jovinus captured at Averni and cruelly murdered by the dukes of Honorius. The city of Treves, by the connivance of one of the senators called Lucius, was captured and burned by the Franks. Cassinus, a comptroller of the household, undertook an expedition against the Franks, etc. Then returning to speak of Theudemer, he adds, the Franks, on making diligent search for a king, elected from their own number, and according to the ancient custom, with long hair, chose as their king from the family of Priamus, Phrygius, and Francio Theudemer, the son of Ricimer. This Theudemer was killed by the Romans in the battle mentioned above, that is, in the battle with Castinus's army. Of his death, Gregory Turonensis makes this further mention. In the consular records, we read that Theudemer, king of the Franks and son of Ricimer, was with his mother Asilla killed with the sword. Upon the victory of the Romans, the Franks and rebelling Gauls, who in the time of Theudemer were at war with one another, united to strengthen themselves, as Ordericus Vitalis thus mentions. When the Gauls had taken the first step to rebel against the Romans, the Franks united with them, and as a united people elected as their king Pharamundus, the son of Duke Suno. Prosper sets down the time in the 25th year of Honorius. Pharamundus became king of France. This, Bucher well observes, refers to the end of the year 416, or the beginning of the next year, dating the years of Honorius from the death of Valentinian, and argues well that at this time Pharamond was not only king by the constitution of the Franks, but crowned also by the consent of Honorius, and had part of Gallia assigned him by covenant. And this might be the cause that Roman writers reckoned him the first king, which some not understanding have reputed him the founder of this kingdom by an army of the Transrhenane Franks. He might come with such an army, but he succeeded Theudemer by right of blood and consent of the people. For the above cited passage of Fritigarius, after the extinction of dukes among the Franks, kings were again elected from the same stock as in former times, implies that the kingdom continued to this new elected family during the reign of more kings than one. If you date the years of Honorius from the death of his father, the reign of Pharamond might begin 2 years later than is assigned by Bucher. The Salic laws made in his reign, which are yet extant, shew by their name that it was the kingdom of the Salii over which he reigned, and by the pecuniary mulets in them, that the place where he reigned abounded much with money, and consequently was within the empire. rude Germany, knowing not the use of money till they mixed with the Romans, and the preface also to the Salic laws, written and prefixed to them soon after the conversion of the Franks to the Christian religion. That is, in the end of the reign of Meravius, or soon after the original of this kingdom is thus described. This nation, which while it was strong and vigorous in its might, struck from its neck the oppressive Roman yoke in war, etc. This kingdom, therefore, was erected not by invasion, but by rebellion, as was described above. Prosper, in registering their kings in order, tells us Pharamundus reigned in France, Claudio reigned in France, Meravius reigned in France, and who can imagine but that in all these places he meant one and the same Francia? And yet 'tis certain that the Francia of Meravius was in Gallia. Yet the father of Pharamund, being king of a body of Franks in Germany, in the reign of the Emperor Theodosius, as above, Pharamund might reign over the same Franks in Germany before he succeeded Theodomir in the kingdom of the Salians within the empire, and even before Theodomir began his reign. Suppose in the first year of Honorius, or when those Franks, being repulsed by Stilicho, lost their kings Marcomir and Suno, one of which was the father of Pharamond, and the Roman Franks, after the death of Theodomir, might invite Pharamond with his people from beyond the Rhine. But we are not to regard the reign of Pharamond in Germany. We are to date this kingdom from its rise within the empire, and to look upon it as strengthened by the access of other Franks coming from beyond the Rhine, whether in the reign of this king or in that of his successor Claudio. For in the last year of Pharamund's reign, Idias took from him a part of his possession in Gallia, but his successor Claudio, whom Fredegarius represents as the son of Theodomir, and some call Claugio, Cloio, and Claudius, inviting from beyond the Rhine a great body of Franks, recovered all and carried on their conquests as far as the river Soami. Then those Franks, dividing conquests with him, erected certain new kingdoms of Cologne and Cambrai, and some other cities, all which were afterwards conquered by Claudius, who also drove the Goths out of Gallia and fixed his seat at Paris, where it has continued ever since. And this was the original of the present kingdom of France. The kings of Britain were AC 407 or 408, Marcus, Gratian, and Constantine successively. AC 425, Vortigern, 466, Aurelius Ambrosius, 498, Uther Pendraco, 508, Arthur, 542, Constantinus, 545, Aurelius Cunanis, 578, Vortiporius, 581, Malgo, 586, Careticus, 613, Cadwan, 635, Cadwallin, 676, Cadwallader. The three first were Roman tyrants who revolted from the empire. Orosius, Prosper, and Zosimus connect their revolt with the eruptions of the barbarians into Gallia, as consequent thereunto. Prosper, with whom Zosimus agrees, puts it in the year which began the day after that eruption. The just time I thus collect. Marcus reigned not many days, Gratian 4 months, and Constantine 3 years. He was slain the year after the taking of Rome. That is AC 411, 14 Cal October. Once the revolt was in spring AC 408, Sozomen joins Constantine's expedition into Gallia with Arcadius's death, or the times a little after, and Arcadius died AC 408, May the 1st. Now, though the reign of these tyrants was but short, Yet they gave a beginning to the kingdom of Britain, and so many be reckoned the three first kings, especially since the posterity of Constantine, viz., his sons Aurelius Ambrosius and Uther Pendraco, and his grandson Arthur reigned afterwards. For from the time of the revolt of these tyrants, Britain continued a distinct kingdom, absolved from subjection to the empire, the emperor not being able to spare soldiers to be sent thither to receive and keep the island, and therefore neglecting it, as we learned by unquestionable records. For Prosper tells us AC 410 in the consulship of Varianus, at this time, owing to the weakness of the Romans, the military forces in Britain were reduced to a minimum. And Sigebert, conjoining this with the siege of Rome, saith, the military forces among the Britons were reduced, and the Britons freed themselves from the Roman suzerainty. And Zosimus, lib 6, the Trans-Rhenane barbarians invading all places reduced the inhabitants of the island of Britain, and also certain Celtic nations to that pass, that they fell off from the Roman Empire, and being no longer obedient to the Roman laws, they lived in separate bodies after their own pleasure. The Britons, therefore, taking up arms and hazarding themselves for their own safety, freed their cities from the eminent barbarians. In like manner, all Brabant and some other provinces of the Gauls, imitating the Britons, freed themselves also, ejecting the Roman presidents and forming themselves into a sort of commonwealth according to their own pleasure. This rebellion of Britain and the Celtic nations happened when Constantine usurped the kingdom. So also Procopius, lib 1 Vandal, speaking of the same Constantine, saith, Constantine, being overcome in battle, was slain with his children. Yet the Romans could not recover Britain anymore, but from that time it remained under tyrants. And Beta L1C11, the power of Rome was broken by the Goths in the year 1164 AUC, and from that date the Romans ceased to rule in Britain. And Ethelvaldus, from the storming of Rome by the Goths, the rule of the Romans ended in the island of Britain, and in many other countries, which they had been holding in servile bondage. And Theodoret, Serm 9 de Quran Greek effect, about the year 424, reckons the Britons among the nations which were not then in subjection to the Roman Empire. Thus Sigonius, about the year 411, Roman rule after the withdrawal of Constantine ceased to exist in Britain. Between the death of Constantine and the reign of Vortigern was an interregnum of about 14 years, in which the Britons had wars with the Picts and Scots, and twice obtained the assistance of a Roman legion, who drove out the enemy, but told them positively at their departure that they would come no more. Of Vortigern's beginning to reign, there is this record in an old chronicle in Nennius, quoted by Camden and others. Vortigernus gained control in Britain in the consulship of Theodosius and Valentinianus, viz. AC 425, and in the fourth year of his reign, the Saxons invaded Britain, in the consulship of Felix and Taurus, viz. AC 428. This coming of the Saxons, Sigebert, refers to the fourth year of Valentinian, which falls in with the year 428 assigned by this chronicle, and 2 years after, the Saxons, together with the Picts, were beaten by the Britons. Afterwards, in the reign of Marcian, the emperor, that is, between the years 450 and 456, the Saxons under Hengist were called in by the Britons, but 6 years after revolted from them, made war upon them with various success, and by degrees succeeded them. Yet the Britons continued a flourishing kingdom till the reign of Caractacus, and the war between the two nations continued till the pontificate of Sergius AC 688, Rolvinx Antiqua Saxon L1C6. 8. The kings of the Huns were AC 406 Oktar and Rugala. 433 Blida and Attila. Oktar and Rugala were brothers of Munzuk, king of the Huns in Gothia, beyond the Danube. And Bleda and Attila were his sons, and Munzuk was the son of Balamir. The two first, as Jornandes tells us, were kings of the Huns, but not of them all, and had the two last for their successors. I date the reign of the Huns in Pannonia from the time that the Vandals and Alans relinquished Pannonia to them, AC 407. Sigonius from the time that the Visigoths relinquished Pannonia, AC 408 writes, "It is agreed, saith he, when the Goths quitted Illyricum, the Huns took their place and first of all secured Pannonia. For Honorius was so surrounded by difficulties that he was without forces to meet them and so was unable to check them directly. But adopting a better plan, he devoted his attention to a peaceable settlement and concluded an agreement with them upon the mutual interchange of hostages. One of the hostages given, Idicus, who had also been a hostage to Alaric, is especially worthy of note. How Idius was hostage to the Goths and Huns is related by Frigeridas, who, when he had mentioned that Theodosius, emperor of the East, had sent grievous commands to John, who after the death of Honorius had usurped the crown of the Western Empire, he subjoins. Disturbed by these commands, John sent Idius, who at that time was in charge of the palace, across to the Huns with a huge amount of gold. They being acquainted with him from the time when he was a hostage among them, and being bound to him by intimate ties of friendship. And a little after, Idius was 3 years a hostage with Alaric, next a hostage with the Huns, and subsequently son-in-law of Carpilio, after holding the offices of comptroller of the household and governor of the palace for John. Now, Bucher shews that Idius was hostage to Alaric till the year 410, when Alaric died, and to the Huns between the years 411 and 415, and son-in-law to Carpillo about the year 417 or 418, and Curopalades to John about the end of the year 423. Hence 'tis probable that he became hostage to the Huns about the year 412 or 413, when Honorius made leagues with almost all the barbarous nations and granted them seats. But I had rather say with Sigonius that Idius became hostage to Alaric AC 403. It is further manifest out of Prosper that the Huns were in quiet possession of Pannonia in the year 432. For in the first book of Eusebius's Chronicle, Prosper writes, 10 years after the death of Honorius, Idius, after his fight with Boniface, withdrew to the tribe of the Huns, then governed by Rugella, and on gaining the help, he sought returned to Roman soil. And in the second book, in the consulship of Idius and Valerius, Idius, resigning his office, came as an exile to the Huns in Pannonia, and by using their friendly assistance, he obtained the emperor's pardon for his relinquishment of office. Hereby it appears that at this time, Rugilla, or as Maximus calls him, Rucilla, reigned over the Huns in Pannonia, and that Pannonia was not now so much as accounted within the soil of the empire, being formerly granted away to the Huns, and that these were the very same body of Huns with which Idius had, in the time of his being an hostage, contracted friendship, by virtue of which, as he solicited them before to the aid of John the tyrant AC 424, so now he procured their intercession for himself with the emperor. Oktar died AC 430, for Socrates tells us that about that time the Burgundians, having been newly vexed by the Huns upon intelligence of Oktar's death, seeing them without a leader, sat upon them suddenly with so much vigor that 3,000 Burgundians slew 10,000 Huns. Of Rogella's being now king in Pannonia, you have heard already. He died AC 433 and was succeeded by Bleda, as Prosper and Maximus inform us. This Bleda, with his brother Attila, were before this time kings of the Huns beyond the Danube, their father Munzuk's kingdom being divided between them, and now they united the kingdom of Pannonia to their own, whence Paulus Diaconus saith they did bear sway within the borders of Pannonia, Dacia. In the year 441, they began to invade the empire afresh, adding to the Pannonian forces new and great armies from Scythia. But this war was presently composed, and then Attila, seeing Bleda, inclined to peace, slew him, AC 444, inherited his dominions, and invaded the empire again. At length, after various great wars with the Romans, Attila perished AC 454, and his sons quarreling about his dominions gave occasion to the Gepides, Ostrogoths, and other nations who were their subjects, to rebel and make war upon them. The same year, the Ostrogoths had seats granted them in Pannonia by the emperors Marcian and Valentinian, and with the Romans ejected the Huns out of Pannonia soon after the death of Attila, as all historians agree. This ejection was in the reign of Avitus, as is mentioned in the Chronicum Boreorum and in the Sidonius. Carm 7 in Avidum, which speaks thus of that emperor, quote, "'Tis easy to conceive what will be the exploits in actual combat of the man whose mere approach recovered the province of Pannonia, lost to us for many generations." The poet means that by the coming of Avitus, the Huns yielded more easily to the Goths. This was written by Sidonius in the beginning of the reign of Avitus, and his reign began in the end of the year 455 and lasted not one full year. Jornandes tells us in the 12th year of the reign of Valia, the Huns, almost 50 years after their invasion of Pannonia, were expelled by the Romans and Goths, and Marcellinus, in the consulship of Hierarius and Ardaburius, the provinces of Pannonia, which for 50 years had been in the possession of the Huns, were recovered by the Romans, whence it should seem that the Huns invaded and held Pannonia from the year 378 or 379 to the year 427, and then were driven out of it. But this is a plain mistake, for it is certain that the Emperor Theodosius left the empire entire, and we have shewed out of Prosper that the Huns were in quiet possession of Pannonia in the year 432. The Visigoths in those days had nothing to do with Pannonia, and the Ostrogoths continued subject to the Huns till the death of Attila, AC 454. And valiant king of the Visigoths did not reign 12 years. He began his reign in the end of the year 415, reigned 3 years, and was slain AC 419, as Idasius, Isidorus, and the Spanish manuscript chronicles seen by Gradius testify. And Olympiodorus, who carries his history only to the year 425, sets down therein the death of Valia king of the Visigoths and conjoins it with that of Constantius, which happened AC 420, wherefore the Valia of Jornandes, who reigned at the least 12 years, is some other king. And I suspect that this name hath been put by mistake for Valimir, king of the Ostrogoths. For the action recorded was of the Romans and Ostrogoths driving the Huns out of Pannonia after the death of Attila, and it is not likely that the historian would refer the history of the Ostrogoths to the years of the Visigothic kings. This action happened in the end of the year 455, which I take to be the 12th year of Valimir in Pannonia. and which was almost 50 years after the year 406, in which the Huns succeeded the Vandals and Alans in Pannonia. Upon the ceasing of the line of Hunnemon, the son of Hermaneric, the Ostrogoths lived without kings of their own nation about 40 years together, being subject to the Huns. And when Alaric began to make war upon the Romans, which was in the year 444, he made Valamir with his brothers Theodomir and Vidimir, the grandsons of Venithar, captains or kings of the Ostrogoths under him. In the 12th year of Valamir's reign, dated from thence, the Huns were driven out of Pannonia. Yet the Huns were not so ejected, but that they had further contests with the Romans, till the head of Densix, the son of Attila, was carried to Constantinople AC 469, in the consulship of Zeno and Marcian, as Marcellinus relates. Nor were they yet totally ejected the empire. For besides their relics in Pannonia, Sigonius tells us that when the emperors Marcian and Valentinian granted Pannonia to the Goths, which was in the year 454, they granted part of Illyricum to some of the Huns and Sarmatians. And in the year 526, when the Lombards were moving into Pannonia, made war there with the Gepides, the Everes, a part of the Huns, who had taken the name of Everes from one of their kings, assisted the Lombards in that war. And the Lombards afterwards, when they went into Italy, left their seats in Pannonia to the Everes in recompense of their friendship. From that time, the Huns grew again very powerful, their kings, whom they called Shagan, troubling the empire much in their reigns of the emperors Moridius, Phocas, and Heraclius. And this is the original of the present kingdom of Hungary, which from these Everes and other Huns mixed together took the name of Hun Avaria, and by contraction Hungary. 9. The Lombards, before they came over the Danube, were commanded by two captains, Ibor and Aeon, after whose death they had kings Agilmon, Lamiso, Letu, Hidahak, Gudahak, Clafo, Tato, Vato, Walter, Adoin, Alboin, Cleophas, etc. Agilmon was the son of Aeon, who became their king according to Prosper in the consulship of Honorius and Theodosius AC 389. Reigned 33 years according to Paulus Vonafridis, and was slain in battle by the Bulgarians. Prosper places his death in the consulship of Marianianus and Eslepidorus AC 423. Lamiso routed the Bulgarians and reigned 3 years, and Lichu almost 40. Gudahok was contemporary to Odoacer, king of Heruli in Italy, and led his people from Pannonia into Rhegia, a country on the north side of Noricum, next beyond the Danube, from whence Odoacer then carried his people into Italy. Tato overthrew the kingdom of Heruli beyond the Danube. Lacho conquered the Suevians, a kingdom then bounded on the east by Bavaria, on the west by France, and on the south by the Burgundians. Adoin returned into Pannonia, AC 526, and there overcame the Gepides. Alboin, AC 551, overthrew the kingdom of the Gepides and slew their king Chunanamund, AC 563. He assisted the Greek emperor against Totila, king of the Ostrogoths in Italy, and AC 568 led his people out of Pannonia into Lombardy, where they reigned till the year 774. According to Paulus Diaconus, the Lombards, with many other Gothic nations, came into the empire from beyond the Danube in the reign of Arcadius and Honorius. That is between the years 395 and 408, but they might come in a little earlier. For we are told that the Lombards, under their captains Ibor and Aeon, beat the Vandals in battle, and Prosper placeth this victory in the consulship of Ausonius and Olybrius, that is AC 379. Before this war, the Vandals had remained quiet 40 years in the seats granted them in Pannonia by Constantine the Great. And therefore, if these were the same Vandals, this war must have been in Pannonia, and might be occasioned by the coming of the Lombards over the Danube into Pannonia a year or two before the battle, and so put an end to that quiet which had lasted 40 years. After Gratian and Theodosius had quieted the barbarians, they might either retire over the Danube or continue quiet under the Romans till the death of Theodosius, and then either invade the empire anew or throw off all subjection to it. By their wars first with the Vandals and then with the Bulgarians, a Scythian nation, so called from the river Volga whence they came, it appears that even in those days they were a kingdom not contemptible. 10. These 9 kingdoms being rent away, we are next to consider the residue of the Western Empire. While this empire continued entire, it was the beast itself, but the residue thereof is only a part of it. Now, if this part be considered as a horn, the reign of this horn may be dated from the translation of the imperial seat from Rome to Ravenna, which was in October AC 408. For then the emperor Honorius, fearing the Alaric would besiege him in Rome if he stayed there, retired to Milan and thence to Ravenna, and the ensuing siege and sacking of Rome confirmed his residence there, so that he and his successors ever after made it their home. Accordingly, Machiavel, in his Florentine history, writes that Valentinian, having left home, translated the seat of the empire to Ravenna. Rhaetia belonged to the Western Emperor so long as that empire stood, and then it descended with Italy and the Roman Senate to Odoacer, king of the Heruli in Italy, and after him to Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths, and his successors, by the grant of the Greek emperors. Upon the death of Valentinian II, the Alemans and Suevians invaded Rhaetia AC 455, but I do not find they erected any settled kingdom there, for in the year 457, while they were yet depopulating Rhaetia, they were attacked and beaten by burgomaster of the horse to the emperor Majoranus, and I hear nothing more of their invading Rhaetia. Clodovius, king of France, in or about the year 496, conquered a kingdom of the Alemans and slew their last king, Irmeric. But this kingdom was seated in Germany and only bordered upon Rhaetia, for its people fled from Clodovius into the neighboring kingdom of the Ostrogoths under Theodoric, who received them as friends and wrote a friendly letter to Clodovius in their behalf. And by this means they became inhabitants of Rhaetia as subjects under the dominion of the Ostrogoths. When the Greek emperor conquered the Ostrogoths, he succeeded them in the kingdom of Ravenna, not only by right of conquest, but also by right of inheritance. The Roman Senate still going along with this kingdom, therefore we may reckon that this kingdom continued in the exarchate of Ravenna and Senate of Rome. For the remainder of the Western Empire went along with the Senate of Rome by reason of the right which this Senate still retained, and at length exerted, of choosing a new Western emperor. I have now enumerated the 10 kingdoms into which the Western Empire became divided at its first breaking, that is, at the time of Rome's being besieged and taken by the Goths. Some of these kingdoms at length fell and new ones arose. But whatever was their number afterwards, they are still called the 10 kings from their first number.
Chapter 7 of the 11th Horn of Daniel's Fourth Beast. Now, chapter 7, verse 8. Daniel considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And, verse 20, 21, his look was more stout than his fellows. And the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them. And one who stood by and made Daniel know the interpretation of these things told him, verse 24, that the 10 horns were 10 kings that should arise, and another should arise after them, and be diverse from the first. And he should subdue 3 kings, verse 25, and speak great words against the Most High, and wear out the saints, and think to change times and laws, and that they should be given into his hands until a time, and times, and half a time. Kings are put for kingdoms, as above, and therefore the little horn is a little kingdom. It was a horn of the 4th beast, and rooted up 3 of his first horns, and therefore we are to look for it among the nations of the Latin Empire, after the rise of the 10 horns. But it was a kingdom of a different kind from the other 10 kingdoms, having a life or soul peculiar to itself, with eyes and a mouth. By its eyes it was a seer, and by its mouth speaking great things, and changing times and laws. It was a prophet as well as a king. And such a seer, a prophet, and a king is the Church of Rome. A seer is a bishop in the literal sense of the word, and this church claims the universal bishopric. With his mouth he gives laws to kings and nations as an oracle, and pretends to infallibility, and that his dictates are binding to the whole world, which is to be a prophet in the highest degree. In the 8th century, by rooting up and subduing the Exarchate of Ravenna, the kingdom of the Lombards, and the Senate and dukedom of Rome, he acquired Peter's patrimony out of their dominions, and thereby rose up as a temporal prince or king, or horn of the 4th beast. In a small book printed at Paris, A.C. 1689, entitled An Historical Dissertation upon some Coins of Charles the Great, Ludovicus Pius Lotharius and their successors, stamped at Rome, it is recorded that in the days of Pope Leo X, there was remaining in the Vatican, and till those days exposed to public view, an inscription in honor of Pippin, the father of Charles the Great, in these words: Pippinum Pium primum fuisse qui amplificando ecclesiae Romanae viam apparuit exarchatu Ravenate and plurimus aliis oblatus. That Pippin the Pious was the first who opened a way to the grandeur of the Church of Rome, conferring upon her the Exarchate of Ravenna and many other oblations. In and before the reign of the Emperors Gratian and Theodosius, the Bishop of Rome lived splendidly, but this was by the oblations of the Roman ladies, as Ammianus describes. After those reigns, Italy was invaded by foreign nations, and did not get rid of her troubles before the fall of the kingdom of Lombardy. It was certainly by the victory of the See of Rome over the Greek emperor, the king of Lombardy, and the Senate of Rome, that she acquired Peter's patrimony and rose up to her greatness. The donation of Constantine the Great is a fiction, and so is the donation of the Alps Cotyle to the Pope of Eripert, king of the Lombards. For the Alps Cotyle were a part of the Exarchate, and in the days of Eripert belonged to the Greek emperor. The invocation of the dead, and veneration of their images, being gradually introduced in the 4th 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries, the Greek Emperor Philippicus declared against the latter AC 711 or 712, and the Emperor Leo Isaurus, to put a stop to it, called a meeting of councillors and bishops in his palace AC 726. Sigonius de Regno Italiae ad Ann 726, and by their advice put out an edict against that worship, and wrote to Pope Gregory II that a general council might be called. But the Pope thereupon called a council at Rome, confirmed the worship of images, excommunicated the Greek emperor, absolved the people from their allegiance, and forbade them to pay tribute or otherwise be obedient to him. Then the people of Rome, Campania, Ravenna, and Pentapolis, with the cities under them, revolted and laid violent hands upon their magistrates, killing the exarch Paul at Ravenna, and laying aside Peter Duke of Rome, who was become blind. And when Exileratus Duke of Campania incited the people against the Pope, the Romans invaded Campania, and slew him with his son Hadrian. Then a new exarch, Eutychius, coming to Naples, sent some secretly to take away the lives of the Pope and the nobles of Rome. But the plot being discovered, the Romans revolted absolutely from the Greek emperor, and took an oath to preserve the life of the Pope, to defend his state, and be obedient to his authority in all things. Thus Rome, with its duchy, including part of Tuscany and part of Campania, revolted in the year 726, and became a free state under the government of the Senate of this city. The authority of the Senate in civil affairs was henceforward absolute, the authority of the Pope extending hitherto no farther than to the affairs of the Church only. At the time, the Lombards also being zealous for the worship of images, and pretending to favor the cause of the Pope, invaded the cities of the Exarchate, and at length, viz. AC 752, took Ravenna and put an end to the Exarchate. And this was the first of the 3 kingdoms which fell before the Little Horn. In the year 751, Pope Zachary deposed Kelderic, a slothful and useless king of France, and the last of the race of Meroveus, and, absolving his subjects from their oath of allegiance, gave the kingdom to Pippin, the major of the palace, and thereby made a new and potent friend. His successor, Pope Stephen III, knowing better how to deal with the Greek emperor than with the Lombards, went the next year to the king of the Lombards to persuade him to return the exarchate to the emperor. But this not succeeding, he went into France, and persuaded Pippin to take the exarchate and Pentapolis from the Lombards, and give it to St. Peter. Accordingly, Pippin AC 754 came with an army into Italy, and made Astolphus, king of the Lombards, promise the surrender. But the next year Astolphus, on the contrary, to revenge himself on the Pope, besieged the city of Rome. Whereupon the Pope sent letters to Pippin, wherein he told him that if he came not speedily against the Lombards, he should be banned from the kingdom of God and eternal life, that is, he should be excommunicated. Pippin, therefore, fearing a revolt of his subjects, and being indebted to the Church of Rome, came speedily with an army into Italy, raised the siege, besieged the Lombards in Pavia, and forced them to surrender the Exarchate and region of Pentapolis to the Pope for a perpetual possession. Thus the Pope became Lord of Ravenna, and the Exarchate, some few cities excepted, and the keys were sent to Rome, and laid upon the confession of St. Peter, that is, upon his tomb at the high altar, for a token of lawful and perpetual lordship, and by the king's freely rendered devotion, as the inscription of a coin of Pippin hath it. This was in the year of Christ 755, and henceforward the popes, being temporal princes, left off in their epistles and bulls to note the years of the Greek emperors, as they had hitherto done. After this, the Lombards invading the Pope's countries, Pope Adrian sent to Charles the Great, the son and successor of Pippin, to come to his assistance. Accordingly, Charles entered Italy with an army, invaded the Lombards, overthrew their kingdom, became master of their countries, and restored to the Pope not only what they had taken from him, but also the rest of the exarchate which they had promised Pippin to surrender to him, but had hitherto detained, and also gave him some cities of the Lombards, and was in return himself made patricius by the Romans, and had the authority of confirming the elections of the popes conferred upon him. These things were done in the years 773 and 774. This kingdom of the Lombards was the second kingdom which fell before the Little Horn. But Rome, which was to be the seat of his kingdom, was not yet his own. In the year 796, Leo III, being made pope, notified his election to Charles the Great by his legates, sending to him for a present the golden keys of the confession of Peter, and the banner of the city of Rome, the first as an acknowledgment of the Pope's holding the cities of the Exarchate and Lombardy by the grant of Charles, the other as a signification that Charles should come and subdue the Senate and people of Rome, as he had done the Exarchate and the kingdom of the Lombards. For the Pope at the same time desired Charles to send some of his princes to Rome, who might subject the Roman people to him, and bind them by oath in fide and subjection, infiality and subjection, as his words are recited by Sigonius. An anonymous poet published by Baclaris at Strasbourg expresseth it thus: and he admonished him with pious entreaties to send certain of his princes, and subdue the Roman people to himself, and by enforcing a treaty inviolate, to ensure such a measure of fidelity on the guarantee of solemn oaths. Hence arose a misunderstanding between the Pope and the city, and the Romans about 2 or 3 years after, by assistance of some of the clergy, raised such tumults against him as gave occasion to a new state of things in all the West. For 2 of the clergy accused him of crimes, and the Romans with an armed force seized him, stripped him of his sacerdotal habit, and imprisoned him in a monastery. But by assistance of his friends he made his escape, and fled into Germany to Charles the Great, to whom he complained of the Romans for acting against him out of a design to throw off all authority of the Church, and to recover their ancient freedom. In his absence, his accusers with their forces ravaged the possessions of the Church, and sent the accusations to Charles, who before the end of the year sent the Pope back to Rome with a large retinue. The nobles and bishops of France who accompanied him examined the chief of his accusers at Rome, and sent them into France in custody. This was in the year 799. The next year Charles himself went to Rome, and upon a day appointed presided in a council of Italian and French bishops to hear both parties. But when the Pope's adversaries expected to be heard vide Anastasium, the council declared that he who was the supreme judge of all men was above being judged by any other than himself, whereupon he made a solemn declaration of his innocence before all the people, and by doing so was looked upon as acquitted. Soon after, upon Christmas Day, the people of Rome, who had hitherto elected their bishop, and reckoned that they and their senate inherited the rights of the ancient senate and people of Rome, voted Charles the emperor, and subjected themselves to him in such manner as the old Roman Empire, and their senate were subjected to the old Roman emperors. The Pope crowned him, and anointed him with holy oil, and worshipped him on his knees after the manner of adoring the old Roman emperors, as the aforesaid poet thus relates. Wherefore when the king's praises had been spoken, he was worshipped even by that exalted prelate, as was the manner due of yore to ancient emperors. The emperor, on the other hand, took the following oath to the Pope: In the name of Christ, I, Charles, Emperor before God and the Apostle Peter, vow and promise that I shall protect and guard this holy Roman Church in all times of need, to the best of my knowledge and ability, in as far as I be upheld by divine help. The emperor was also made consul of Rome, and his son Pippin crowned king of Italy, and henceforward the emperor styled himself Most Serene Charles Augustus, the crowned of God, the mighty, the peacemaker, governor of the empire of Rome, or emperor of the Romans, and was prayed for in the churches of Rome. His image was henceforward put upon the coins of Rome, while the enemies of the Pope, to the number of 300 Romans and 2 or 3 of the clergy, were sentenced to death. The 300 Romans were beheaded in one day in the Lateran fields. But the clergymen, at the intercession of the Pope, were pardoned and banished into France. And thus the title of Roman Emperor, which had hitherto been in the Greek emperors, was by this act transferred in the West to the kings of France. After these things, Charles gave the city and duchy of Rome to the Pope, subordinately to himself as Emperor of the Romans. Saigon de Regno Ital. Spent the winter in ordering the affairs of Rome, and those of the Apostolic See and of all Italy, both civil and ecclesiastical, and in making new laws for them, and returned the next summer into France, leaving the city under its senate, and both under the Pope and himself. But hearing that his new laws were not observed by the judges in dictating the law, nor by the people in hearing it, and that the great men took servants from free men, and from the churches and monasteries to labor in their vineyards, fields, pastures, and houses, and continued to exact cattle and wine of them, and to oppress those that served the churches, he wrote to his son Pippin to remedy these abuses, to take care of the church, and see his laws executed. Now the Senate and people and principality of Rome I take to be the third king the little horn overcame, and even the chief of the three. For this people elected the Pope and the Emperor, and now, by electing the Emperor and making him consul, was acknowledged to retain the authority of the old Roman Senate and people. This city was the metropolis of the old Roman Empire, represented in Daniel by the fourth beast. And by subduing the senate and people and duchy, it became the metropolis of the little horn of that beast, and completed Peter's patrimony, which was the kingdom of that horn. Besides, this victory was attended with greater consequences than those over the other two kings, for it set up the Western Empire, which continues to this day. It set up the Pope above the judicature of the Roman Senate, and above that of a council of Italian and French bishops, and even above all human judicature, and gave him the supremacy over the Western churches and their councils in a high degree. It gave him a look more stout than his fellows, so that when this new religion began to be established in the minds of men, he grappled not only with kings, but even with the Western Emperor himself. It is observable also that the custom of kissing the Pope's feet, an honor superior to that of kings and emperors, began about this time. There are some instances of it in the 9th century. Platina tells us that the feet of Pope Leo IV were kissed, according to ancient custom, by all who came to him, and some say that Leo III began this custom, pretending that his hand was infected by the kiss of a woman. The popes began also about this time to canonize saints, and to grant indulgences and pardons, and some represent that Leo III was the first author of all these things. It is further observable that Charles the Great, between the years 775 and 796, conquered all Germany from the Rhine and Danube northward to the Baltic Sea, and eastward to the river Teis, extending his conquests also into Spain as far as the river Ebro. And by these conquests he laid the foundation of the new empire, and at the same time propagated the Roman Catholic religion into all his conquests, obliging the Saxons and Huns, who were heathens, to receive the Roman faith, and distributing his northern conquests into bishoprics, granting tithes to the clergy and Peterpence to the Pope. By all which the Church of Rome was highly enlarged, enriched, exalted, and established. In the forementioned dissertation upon some coins of Charles the Great, Ludovicus Pius, Lotharius, and their successors, stamped at Rome, there is a draft of a piece of mosaic work which Pope Leo III caused to be made in his palace near the church of Joine Lateran, in memory of his sending the standard or banner of the city of Rome curiously wrought to Charles the Great, and which still remained there at the publishing of the said book. In the mosaic work there appeared Peter with 3 keys in his lap, reaching the pallium to the Pope with his right hand, and the banner of the city to Charles the Great with his left. By the Pope with this inscription, Our most holy Lord Pope Leo. By the King this, To our Lord King Charles. And under the feet of Peter this, Blessed Peter, grant life to Pope Leo and victory to King Charles. This monument gives the title of King to Charles, and therefore was erected before he was emperor. It was erected when Peter was reaching the pallium to the Pope, and the Pope was sending the banner of the city to Charles, that is, AC 796. The words above, Our most holy Lord Pope Leo to our Lord King Charles, relate to the message, and the words below, Blessed Peter, grant life to Pope Leo and victory to King Charles, are a prayer that in this undertaking God would preserve the life of the Pope and give victory to the King over the Romans. The 3 keys in the lap of Peter signify the keys of the 3 parts of his patrimony, that of Rome with its duchy, which the Pope claimed and was conquering, those of Ravenna with the exarchate, and of the territories taken from the Lombards, both which he had newly conquered. These were the 3 dominions whose keys were in the lap of St. Peter, and whose crowns are now worn by the Pope, and by the conquest of which he became the little horn of the 4th beast. By Peter's giving the pallium to the Pope with his right hand, and by the banner of the city to the king with his left, and by naming the Pope before the king in the inscription, may be understood that the Pope was then reckoned superior in dignity to the kings of the earth. After the death of Charles the Great, his son and successor Ludovicus Pius, at the request of the Pope, confirmed the donations of his grandfather and father to the See of Rome. And in the confirmation he names first Rome with its duchy extending into Tuscany and Campania, then the Exarchate of Ravenna with Pentapolis, and in the 3rd place the territories taken from the Lombards, Confirmationem resetit Sigonius lib 4 de Regno Italiae ad Ann 817. These are his 3 conquests, and he was told to hold them of the emperor for the use of the church sub integritate, entirely without the emperor's meddling therewith, or with the jurisdiction or power of the pope therein, unless called thereto in certain cases. This ratification the Emperor Ludovicus made under an oath, and as the king of the Ostrogoths, for acknowledging that he held his kingdom of Italy of the Greek emperor, stamped the effigies of the emperor on one side of his coins, and his own on the reverse. So the Pope made the like acknowledgment to the Western emperor. For the Pope began now to coin money, and the coins of Rome are henceforward found with the heads of the emperors Charles, Ludovicus Pius, Lotharius, and their successors on the one side, and the Pope's inscription on the reverse, for many years.